hemlock nuts. Cracking the Restoration's toughest subjects through rational, balanced analysis of source material.
Hi, I'm Mark, and this is Shay.
Hi.
Was Joseph Smith ever sealed to Emma?
And was Hyrum sealed to his wife?
Important questions, because in the LDS theology, at the very top level of the celestial kingdom, it says in D&C 131 that a person needs to enter into the new and everlasting covenant of marriage, which in the context means that you have to be sealed to your spouse in order to become a celestial being at the highest level. So we're going to ask, did Joseph Smith ever do this? Did Emma Smith ever do this? Did Hyrum Smith ever do this? And where on earth do we get the idea that they did?
Okay, we're going to do a deep dive into these resources and let's find out.
Right.
Okay, so first off, we're going to look at Wikipedia. Wikipedia says that Emma and Joseph were sealed on May 28th, 1843. So according to that resource that we have, the reference for that
citation, the only citation for this claim,
yes, is from a book by Carol Madsen entitled My Dear and Beloved Companion, The Letters of Joseph and Emma Smith. And so we're going to take a look at that real quick.
You'd think it was like a book or something, but it's actually just an article that was published one time on the church website. Here's the article itself. My Dear and Beloved Companion. That's the citation for Wikipedia, right? So Carol Madsen, she writes a bunch of stuff. Awesome. If you look for the word sealing, seal, it's nowhere to be found in the entire article. So it actually, at the very end of the article, there's a timeline put together probably by the media department for the church that kind of summarized this article for her. And that's where you find this claim that they were just, so Wikipedia is making a claim and they're citing this lady who's not even making a claim. Someone who published this on the website, somebody in that department made this claim and there's no footnote for it. Some of these other ones have footnotes, right? 10, 11, 14, 13, 15. Like there's footnotes galore. However, yeah, there's really no citation at all in this claim. And so this is actually what sparked our interest initially, right? We looked at this. And then the church, sure enough, they claim, that 2 weeks after May 16th, 1843, meaning May 28th, Joseph and Emma Smith were sealed for eternity. Here we are again, the LDS Church in their Latter-day Saint History Teacher's Manual. They're teaching this to institute and seminary students. They're making the definitive claim. So let's take a look, because there's a lack of source material whenever you see this citation. And Google, you even ask Google, and they'll say, on this date, it happened. Church website on the right, even in the middle, Joseph Smith's Polygamy website. This is Brian Hales. He's claiming that it occurred on this date. Joseph Smith and Emma Hale Smith Historical Society says that it happened. Wikipedia, like we said. So let's dive into it.
I think it's really interesting that Brian Hales makes such huge speculations about, possibly that Emma had, may have refused to be sealed to Joseph and perhaps offered a legal divorce. I think those are huge speculations.
Guessing. It's just guessing. There's no credibility to any of this stuff as far as that particular paragraph is being shown. So so there's a problem with a lack of source material and proper citations around this claim, right?
So apparently, Joseph was sealed to 25 other women before Emma, which I think is really interesting. If he started this practice 10 years earlier and loved his wife, we know he loved his wife because we have seen so many letters that he's written to his wife. But very interesting that she would have been the last one, or the 26th.
Not the last, yeah.
But the 26th.
25 others before her. And now this is just a Wikipedia list. This numerical list is not exact. Some of these are just 1843, 42, for example. Some of them are just like, spring of whatever, and then a month. So it's hard to get this list exactly right. But Wikipedia, according to them, they're listing 25 other people that were sealed before this thing with Emma. Odd, right?
Yeah, very odd.
How would that make you feel as a woman, right?
Awful.
I throw punch that bitch.
Okay, most LDS church history events go through several different stages of revision as they get prepared to be published in book form. as we know it today. So there's a journal, which is the earliest source typically. There's a draft, which in this case, about 11 years later, Thomas Bullock, after Willard Richards died, he's now putting together a rough draft of the church history in book form. Then a couple years after that, they're preparing final drafts, which is the manuscript, right? So it's journal, then a rough draft, then third is manuscript, which is kind of like a final draft. And that manuscript is what is taken to the publisher typically. And then in 1902, we have published History of the Church, volumes 1 through 7, edited by B.H. Roberts. So we'll be referring to each different stage here: journal, draft, manuscript, and published throughout this presentation, so you guys know which version we're talking about when we're showing these documents. So there's basically two sources we're going to be showing you today. The first one is a May 28th, 1843 journal entry written by Willard Richards. The second one is actually the same source, but it's just the next day. So 2 different days in the same journal. Those are the only sources for Joseph and Emma being sealed, and even Hyrum being sealed. We're going to take a look at these. So this is the first one, May 28th, 1843. Willard Richards writes, "Clouds and rain, cold, 5 p.m. Adjourned council met in the upper room, attended to ordinances, and counseled and prayed that James Adams might be delivered from his enemies, who O.P. Rockwell," that's Orrin Porter Rockwell, "and the 12 be prospered in collecting means to build the Nauvoo house." Now you have an insertion in green, which came later on. And you can notice here, this insertion was written in between the line spacing. So you have line spacing scratched out, or the last line scratched out, and then in between those lines, you have this written: Joseph and J. Adams, and then a squiggle, which is like shorthand for "were married." The Joseph Smith Papers editors say "were married" is what he says there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think it's really interesting that this journal entry was written in longhand, but yet the scribble that was inserted was shorthand. So why would someone do that?
Especially when it was written later on, when the guy obviously had more time to write in longhand. You write in shorthand when you're taking live notes, typically,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't go back and revise it years later and then put a little shorthand little thing right there.
Right.
What's the hurry, Willard? Don't have time to write that out.
And also, this particular journal entry only takes up half of a page. And so there was plenty of room to add in names, dates, what actually happened there. I mean, he spent the time talking about how there were clouds and rain, cold. He goes into detail, but can't seem to put in more information about a marriage.
Right. So according to this, it says that Joseph and J. Adams were married. I know what you're thinking, that's not really like a homosexual wedding, we don't think. Although there's no names of any of the females that were there, we assumed that it was their legal and lawfully wedded wives that were married to them, according to this little footnote.
So James Adams was a judge, and he was also the Grand Master of the Illinois Masonic Lodge. He was already married in 1809 to Harriet Denton. So it's really interesting.
James Adams, and Joseph. We assume Joseph Smith. It doesn't even say. Those two were already married. So why is it saying we're married? They didn't marry each other, obviously. They were already married to their spouses. So like, what an odd term to call it. Later on, this will be interpreted, as we'll show you, as these people are being sealed for eternity by this "we're married" symbol. Now we're going to look at this symbol here on this next page. See this little symbol, this little squiggle that's in green? That's the symbol that means "we're married," according to the JSP editors. So the note there on the right side of the screen for footnote number 457, for that "we're married," "wormered" type thing, transliteration from Taylor shorthand, WRMRRD. And now the bombshell: no contemporary record giving more details on these marriages has been found. Right? However, the marriages of the following day, and that's going to be source number 2, we'll show you next, the following day suggest that Joseph Smith and Adams were married for eternity to their respective wives, Emma Smith and Harriet Denton Adams.
So also in the manuscript History of Brigham Young, he reports nothing about women being present at this meeting or about any marriages.
Yeah, so Brigham Young's manuscript history comes much, much later than this. And it's even after all the revised visions, all the way through the manuscript we talked about, the draft, the manuscript. After that, Brigham Young writes his manuscript history. And even then, they didn't even include anything here.
Yeah.
So it's really bizarre that, on this earliest source of the journal, we have these edits that were clearly made after the fact. And we'll talk about how those translate. So, but before we do, let's talk about Taylor's shorthand. It's a thing. Willard Richards knew this. He used it sometimes. And so this is an example of like what it is and what the symbols look like. It really does save scribes a lot of time. Now, for this particular little squiggle, wormerd or were married, take a look at it. We did actually research and found out that it does actually mean those characters, W, R, and M and D are contained in it. Anyway, so Taylor's shorthand is a real thing, and Willard Richards was fluent in it, and he used it sometimes.
So here we have the draft for May 28th. And so this was written 11 years after the journal was written. And there are 2 shades of ink indicating that there has been a lot of, little things added and changed.
It's darker ink in the red square.
Mm-hmm. So the witnesses are the only things that were added, but there are no marriage details that were carried over from the journal, which is very interesting.
Yeah, so the journal was edited to have marriage details added, but now when you get to the draft, they didn't carry those details forward. They didn't add anything about the weddings here, right? The marriages.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they say leave a line at the very bottom, which is interesting. It's almost like they know that something else is going to happen this day when they're putting this thing together. And so, but they did add a lot of witnesses. Brigham Young, Hyrum, Heber C. Kimball, Willard Richards, Newell K. Whitney, and James Adams were added to this later on. And so by the time we get to the manuscript version written by Leo Hawkins, there's a big placeholder in the orange, those squiggles there on this entry. And marriages, again, by the manuscript, basically the final draft before publication, no mention of these marriages here. But they do add something else to this entry at this point. At the manuscript stage, something is added. Now, remember, you go back to the old one, leave a line. Okay, what did they leave a line for? This. Check out the green underline. Shay, what are they adding at this point?
He says, of the first 12 apostles chosen in Kirtland and ordained under the hands of Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and myself, there have been but 2, but what have lifted their heel against me, namely Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. So it's really interesting because this version is all of a sudden in first person, which, compared to the journal, it's in third person. And why would Joseph had said something like this? Who would have known if he actually said something? Thomas Bullock wasn't there.
Of all the things to add, it's kind of convenient for Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, which were now the first presidency members in the Utah church. So there may be some bolstering of credibility here. I have a hard time believing that Joseph Smith or any leader with common sense may stand up in a group full of dozens of people, men, priesthood leaders, church leaders, friends, and say, basically, the rest of you guys suck except for these 2, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. In fact, all of you guys have lifted your heel against me, which means you've tried to kill me or squash me or destroy me, except for Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball. And I'm just thinking, like, rationally, okay, like, shouldn't that read, you're all excommunicated, and now Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball are now in the first presidency with me because they're the only ones I trust? This quote is just interesting, to say the least. In terms of whether or not Joseph and Emma were sealed, it's interesting that even 12 years later, they're not adding these details.
Mm-hmm.
They only changed the first journal version. And that's where this whole story comes from, that Joseph and Emma were sealed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's compare all of these side by side now.
So there are 4 versions of the story. In the first one, of course, we have the Joseph and J. Adams Wormerd, which, it sounds pretty cryptic to me.
That was added afterwards.
Yes. And then we have the draft, which in first person, where all of the people in attendance were added.
So they switched from third person to first person from the journal to the draft, right?
Mm-hmm.
As if Joseph said this himself now.
Right.
And he's been dead for how many years? Like 9 or 10 years?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then in the manuscript, that one quote added, giving praise to Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball, which is pretty convenient.
Mhm.
And then the published version is basically
It contains all of it. Yeah.
as the manuscript.
Yeah. Now, everything made it through these revisions, except for the fact that Joseph wormered Emma. That did not make it through to the final church history.
Mhm.
Yet we claim it definitively happened today on this date, which is interesting. Okay, so now we're going to look at the second source, and I say that in quotes, air quotes, because it's really the same source. It's just the next day in the journal. So there's really technically just one source. So here it is. The following day, Monday, May 29th, 1843. Now we've got the wormered symbol again in the context of Monday, May 29th, 9 a.m. Met pursuant to adjournment. Hyrum Smith, Brigham Willard, and Sister Thompson were married. And Heber C. Kimball and Newell K. Whitney present also, Joseph, and James Adams. Singing and prayer by Elder Brigham Young, conversation and instruction, and teaching concerning the things of God, had pleasant interview. Okay, so now you've got some things here. Not only is the wormered symbol here for the second time, right? The entire document is longhand. Now you've got
This
really
cryptic message
this
in here.
sudden burst of shorthand
inserted.
in the middle of nowhere. So let's talk about this for a minute. What are these people doing? They're being sealed supposedly to their legal and lawfully wedded spouses. Everyone knew Joseph was married to Emma. There's no secret there. What are they hiding here? Now, I understand that, like, in the case of polygamy, it's illegal. I understand the need for cryptic shorthand, just, hiding these messages. But why? What reason do they have to hide that Joseph and Emma were sealed?
Right. There shouldn't be any reason to hide this. So,
and the church says that during the 1840s, there were lots of sealings going on. So, like, what's wrong with this one? Why is this one hush hush?
right.
Why the cryptic secrecy here?
Mhm.
There's no need for it.
And it's really interesting, just the way that this was written. He's listing the people that were there: Brigham Young, Willard, Thompson, Kimball, Newell, and in the middle of that, they were married. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
So Thompson,
at all.
Who is Thompson? So, okay, so we're going to talk later on about how Mercy Fielding Thompson, like, is the one that they say Thompson is, and we'll get to diagnosing that record a little bit in just a moment. But let me try to find. Here it is. Let's zoom in here and take a look at Thompson, right? Brigham, Willard, and Sis Thompson on that third line and fourth line were murdered.
So if you look at the Sis part,
Who is
which
Thompson?
I don't think it's Sis, I think it was J Thompson, because that line for the J stops. And I think the little squiggly to create an S was created later. And look at the dot. Look at the
period underneath the word.
Yeah, it
There
looks
was
like it was
probably
J period.
one initial, then a period. Now, whether that was S Thompson or J Thompson, don't really know for sure, but we do know that this particular entry right here says that Thompson was fined $300 for assault. This was a court case. This entire day is talking about at 2 p.m. how there's a court case, the People versus James Thompson. James Thompson beat up somebody or something. He's charged $300 or $3. They can't really decide how much he was fined, but he was the guy that was there because this was his court date. I'm willing to bet that Sis Thompson was originally J. Thompson, referring to James Thompson, the only guy listed on this document who had business being at his own court case.
Right.
Why would you invite some random widow named Sister Mercy Fielding Thompson?
I'm sorry, but women were typically not invited to these kinds of gatherings.
It's super rare to even have a woman present at these types of meetings, So this is where the idea comes that later on, and we'll inspect it later on, that Mercy Fielding Thompson was sealed to Hyrum Smith on this day.
No, they didn't.
It's got some problems, right?
Yep.
It's really not what happened. We just have to slow down and look at these sources, and it becomes pretty clear that there's an issue here. Okay, What's interesting about this little wormword signal that means we're married is that you search for it anywhere in history, even Latter-day Saint Joseph Smith papers, and there's only 2 results on Google. That's it. And it's these 2 days of the journal that this is used. In other words, Willard Richards never once used these wormword characters in shorthand on any other document, including the dozens, if not hundreds, of other sealings that were going on in Nauvoo. It's only Joseph Smith's and Hyrum Smith's
Right.
that got wormword in shorthand. So
I think it was definitely a cryptic message or a cryptic insertion, because maybe they were planning on creating a story afterwards, because that
Could be.
seems to be a pattern.
yeah. Either way, it's not something that was symbolized frequently in the records, and that's important to know. Okay, so we're still on the second page, the May 29th, the Monday morning entry in this journal. So now we're going to move to the draft version.
Mhm. So no mention of anyone getting married in this one. No mention of Sister Thompson, only James Thompson, the one who was there for his criminal assault case. So yeah, again, no marriage.
It didn't make it to the draft version. Now let's talk about the manuscript version. Maybe they add some details here. No mention of anyone getting married this day. No mention of Sister Thompson. There's only a mention of, you guessed it, James Thompson, the guy who's there for his criminal assault charge. This is his court case on this entry. So the only Thompson here was James. There's no doubt about it.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay,
Synthesize
so
them all.
there are 4 versions of this story. So basically, pretty similar to the last one. In the journal entry, Sis Thompson was added and wormword, but in the draft, of course, it doesn't show up. So very little has been changed.
Yeah, same thing. Only the earliest version of the journal, which was changed later on, contains marriage details on this day. Keep in mind, like we said at the very beginning, like this is the only thing that points to Joseph and Emma being sealed. Even the Joseph Smith editors themselves said this is the only hint we have of it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about Hyrum and Mercy Fielding Thompson's sealing a little bit. So back to that journal entry that we showed just a few minutes ago. Footnote 458. This is what the editors of Joseph Smith papers say. No contemporary record indicating whom those individuals married on this occasion has been found. Okay, and then the last quote there at the bottom, it says, assuming that the event Thompson remembered was the meeting noted here in Joseph Smith's journal, that her memory of the purpose of the meeting as well as what transpired in it is accurate, this journal entry may be reporting that Hyrum Smith, Brigham Young, and Willard Richards were married for eternity to their respective wives, Mary Fielding Smith, Mary Ann Angel Young, and Janetta Richards on this date. Okay, so these people are saying that Hyrum was probably married on this date, if Thompson is remembering this thing, to their respective wives. Well, here's the thing. Hyrum Smith's respective wife on this date was not Mercy Fielding Thompson. It was Mary Fielding Smith, right? And so even these people that are making these comments here are noticing there's a big problem here. So
right.
The
So
Mercy
much
Fielding
speculation.
Mercy Fielding Smith came much, much later in the 1870-ish when an affidavit came out of nowhere. And we'll get into that right now. So this is the affidavit of Mercy R. Thompson. Okay. June 19th, 1869, well into the Utah Territory stuff. This is the point where they're having to start to gather and to manufacture evidences and affidavits to collect them because they know that legal battles are going to ensue soon. They know they're going to be pulled into court to defend some things. And so they're bolstering their options here. So here's the deal. Thompson writes this. Mercy R. Thompson writes this affidavit. There's a couple problems with it. She got her anniversary marriage or sealing. Marriage or wedding or sealed, nobody knows. Married or sealed. She says the 11th day of August, 1843. That's 2.5 months later than the journal entry indicates, hints towards. And she also mentions that her sister Mary Smith was present, and none of the records indicate that. So her affidavit versus the documents of the church,
Yeah.
there's more problems there.
Really interesting. Like, as a woman, I don't think you would forget or be confused about the day that you were sealed to someone, considering that it's one of the biggest deals in church belief.
Yeah, church doctrinally, like that's the pinnacle, right? Sealed to your spouse.
It's kind of a big deal.
So what would happen if a guy forgot the anniversary? You think? Doghouse, right? She might have been older, might have been losing her memory a little bit, or maybe just the records were fabricated incorrectly and someone missed that detail.
But on that date, August 11th, there isn't anything indicating that actually occurred
Nope.
as well. All we have is this.
Yeah, Hyrum Smith
Affidavit.
getting sealed for eternity to this woman. It never made it into any of their journals or anything like that. So I guess it was very uneventful. Okay, so talking about the sealing here. Here we have the biography of Mercy Rachel Fielding Thompson. And it says that she was married or sealed to Hyrum Smith for time, August 11th in Nauvoo, right? And so just listen to this language here. Assuming that the event Thompson remembered and her memory is accurate, this journal entry may be reported. So it doesn't sound very certain at all. They're just kind of stabbing at it, taking a guess. And again, if the Joseph Smith Papers people and the staff there are guessing, saying, hey, this may have been the case, if her memory is correct, this might be a hint towards this, then why are all these people definitively stating that it happened on this day? If the Joseph Smith Papers staff themselves are not willing to declare that this is actually what happened because they see the problems, because they're looking at these documents, why Joseph Smith and Emma Hale Smith's Historical Society? Why is Wikipedia? Why is Joseph Smith's Polygamy, Brian Hales, making definitive claims like this? Why is the church website in their institute manuals and on their materials that are printed for the youth and the college students to study, why are they definitively saying that this happened?
Mm-hmm.
It's dishonesty.
It is.
It is. There's no absolute proof of any of this happening. All we have is one recollection of a woman, in 1870 who basically says, I think this happened. And she says it happened on August 11th.
Mm-hmm.
Affidavit, sworn testimony,
Right.
perjury if she's lying,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Yet you have Willie Richards saying that it happened on the 28th of May. Anyway, this is the details that we have regarding Joseph and Emma sealing. So we already told you what the Joseph Smith Papers editors say. Now here's what Brigham Young said happened on that day, right? So the editors of JSP say that the only thing that Brigham Young says is that Joseph Smith instructed us further in principles pertaining to the holy priesthood. That doesn't sound like a wedding for eternity. It doesn't sound like there's no substance to that. In fact, in the manuscript history of Brigham Young, he says on this day, Sunday, that we administered to Brother Joseph the same ordinances of endowment and of the holy priesthood, which he administered unto us. Then the next day, he says, with the same brethren, when Joseph instructed us further in principles pertaining to the holy priesthood. Okay, well, there's a little bit of an issue here because Brigham Young, he was the one that let the cat out of the bag. D&C 132, the Revelation on Marriage, was released in 1852, some 9 years after Joseph died. And in that revelation, Doctrine and Covenants 132, it says that there's only one person. I have appointed unto my servant Joseph to hold this power in the last days, and there is never but one on the earth at a time on whom this power and keys of this priesthood are conferred.
Right. So if Brigham is saying we administered to Brother Joseph the same ordinances of the endowment, how is that possible? How are they able to have?
If they're doing sealings, because this refers to like the sealing power of like marriage for eternity and entering into that new and everlasting covenant.
Exactly.
There's never, it says never but one on the earth at a time. So which one is it? Is D&C 132 not accurate, or is their recollection of what actually happened on the day not very accurate, and they're trying to make a connection to the fact that this may have happened?
Yeah, there's so many discrepancies.
Yeah, and so that's all we want to do is we want to just bring some of these things up, because as we study the sources of this important issue, lots of people believe that marriage between a husband and wife for eternity is vital to making this celestial kingdom. if that was such a pinnacle moment for Joseph and Emma, and this is the first time that a dispensation head, someone like Moses who holds these keys, gets to be sealed for eternity to his own wife, don't you think there would have been a lot more chatter about this thing?
Right.
You guys are Latter-day Saints, some of you. What happens when somebody in your family gets sealed to their spouse in the temple? Is it hush-hush? Do you write about it cryptically, like little symbols, so nobody can decipher it later on?
Yeah.
Or do you write it in church records so everybody can see in the genealogy what happened on that day? And
Right.
do you invite your friends?
Mhm.
Are there like
Right.
little parties people
It
have?
should be a big deal. And the fact that they have made such a claim about this without Emma's name even being mentioned. Emma's name was not being mentioned. Like, how could you be claimed to be sealed to someone if your name isn't even mentioned in that claim? So,
And the church is relatively emphatic about keeping accurate details about weddings, right?
yeah.
None of it. Anyway, so we're not trying to make a claim here on whether or not the sealing doctrine is true or false. We all have our opinions. However, this is strictly about Joseph and Emma. Were they actually sealed? And you might say, definitely they were. They had to have been. But based on what? Show me. Show us. Where does it say that they were? Where do you get the idea that they were? Because as we found it so far, the only things that ever mention this are just late Utah revisionist records where these things were snuck into the margins of a page some 10 or so years later. And those story details don't collaborate with even the affidavits that were written later on. And so, like, what can we make of this?
Right. It doesn't look like they were sealed.
They may not have been. Anyway, we weren't there, you weren't there, but this is just one of those interesting things in history because a sealing of spouses together is super important. Joseph Smith, the head of this dispensation, president of the church, we thought we'd look into it. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope it gave you some things to think about. If you guys have anything that you have found in regards to Joseph, Emma, or Hyrum's sealings, let us know in the comments what we may have missed and what you've learned.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks for listening. If you like this show, share it with your people. Join the conversation on Facebook, YouTube, or hemlockknots.com, where you'll find show notes and source material for these subjects and much more.